It is often said that if the curtain ever finally fell on the drama of your life, you would be the one person capable of walking away without a single glance backward. This isn't because you lack heart, but because you have come to realize a profound and perhaps uncomfortable truth. Some people didn't enter your life to understand your soul or to walk beside you in genuine partnership. Instead, they came to study you, to meticulously copy your movements, and to quietly harbor a deep-seated resentment because they realized they could never actually be you. I want you to listen very closely, my dear chosen ones, because we are about to pull back the veil on a reality that hits incredibly hard once you see it for what it is. There are individuals who have spent years of their lives watching your every move, not because they admire your journey, but because they are driven by a fear that is expertly disguised as curiosity. They didn't show up to offer a shoulder to lean on or to celebrate your victories. They showed up to decode the mystery of your resilience. They wanted to dissect your character and figure out the exact mechanics of how someone like you manages to keep standing tall when everyone else would have folded under the same weight. The more they watched you remain upright, the more dangerous you became in their eyes, not because you ever raised a hand or spoke a word against them, but because you refused to break. If you have ever sat in the silence of your room wondering, why me? Why the constant scrutiny? Why the subtle attempts at sabotage? You are finally getting your answer. The strange energy you felt and the quiet competition that was always masked as concern were all symptoms of their realization that you were never ordinary. Chosen ones, you must understand that some people do not hate you for any specific action you have taken or any word you have spoken. They hate you for what you represent to them. You are the living, breathing proof that true strength does not require outside permission to exist, that clarity does not need the noise of applause, and that self-command is a power that functions perfectly without an audience. This is a terrifying prospect for people who survive solely through the use of control, manipulation, and confidence borrowed from the opinions of others. They honestly believed that if they applied enough pressure, it would eventually crush your spirit and leave you defeated. Instead, they watched in horror as that very pressure only served to reveal the diamond, hard core of who you truly are, sharpening your edges rather than dulling them. They thought that by exposing your vulnerabilities or your struggles, they would find a way to weaken your resolve, but they were wrong. Every attempt to silence you or make you small only turned your silence into a weapon of profound strategic depth that they could never hope to master. Here is the fundamental truth they will never understand. Being chosen has never been about being protected from the struggles of life. It has always been about being built with the internal architecture to survive them. Think of it this way: if a storm keeps returning to the same mountain peak year after year, is it because the mountain is weak? No, it is because the mountain refuses to move, and its very existence challenges the storm's power. They circled you like predators, convinced that if they just repeated their tactics enough times, you would eventually surrender to the exhaustion. What they didn't realize was that every repetition of their games was actually a training session for your soul. Every sideways look, every backhanded comment, and every hidden agenda they tried to slip past you became data for your growing intuition. You didn't panic when you felt the walls closing in. Instead, you adapted and learned the terrain of their minds while they were busy burning all their energy chasing shadows of who they thought you were. You may have asked yourself at some point why these people seemed so deeply invested in your downfall, and the answer is simple: your existence disrupts the narrative they have created for themselves. You refuse to play the role they assign to you. You don't seek their validation, and worst of all for them, you have reached a point where you don't even need them to understand you. When you stopped explaining your choices and justifying your existence to people who were committed to misunderstanding you, the balance of power shifted permanently. This message is for those who feel this truth in their bones, those who have lived through the scrutiny and emerged with their clarity intact. If this speaks to your experience, I invite you to support this movement of awakening by liking this video so it can reach the others who are currently sitting in the dark wondering why they feel so targeted. Subscribe to this channel to join a community dedicated to creating content that is honest, powerful, and genuinely life-changing. Your support is more than just a click. It is the fuel that allows us to keep digging deep to bring you the messages of strength and momentum that you need to stay moving forward. The very moment you decided to stop shrinking yourself just to make others feel comfortable was the moment the game ended for them. They realized they could no longer reach your core directly, so they pivot to the only tools they had left: noise, distortion, and half-truths. When people find they can no longer control your mind or touch your spirit, they will almost always attempt to poison the room you are in. They try to damage the perception others have of you because they can no longer manage the reality of who you are. But there is a factor they never accounted for in their calculations. Clarity beats chaos every single time. You have reached a stage where you can see through the patterns with ease, recognizing the difference between genuine curiosity and surveillance disguised as a check-in. What used to feel like a confusing blur of social interactions now feels like an obvious map of intentions. What once hurt your feelings now serves as an instructive lesson on human nature, and what once tempted you to react with anger now barely deserves a second of your attention. This is what true power looks like. It isn't loud, theatrical, or demanding. It is a quiet, internal power that doesn't need to announce its presence. It is the kind of strength that doesn't feel the need to argue its point because it knows it will simply outlast the opposition. They mistook your incredible patience for weakness and your natural empathy for an open door of access, but they were fundamentally wrong. Your patience was your discipline, your empathy was your tool for discernment, and your silence was your ultimate refusal to play a rigged game. Let me be very clear with you, chosen ones. You were never targeted because you were perceived as fragile or easy to break. You were targeted because you were unmanageable and unpredictable to people who can only function when they are following a script. You represent a threat to those who survive on reaction because you are unshakable in the face of their provocations. If the full story of their motives and their quiet envy were ever fully exposed to the light of day, you wouldn't feel a single ounce of anger. Instead, you would feel a profound sense of clarity, and as you know, clarity cuts ties much faster and more cleanly than rage ever could. You would find yourself walking away without the need for a final speech, without a desire for revenge, and without needing their version of closure. You have outgrown the need for external closure because your internal understanding has removed the attachment to their drama. This is precisely why they failed in their mission to bring you down. While they were busy watching your every move, you were quietly becoming someone that their influence could no longer reach. While they were obsessed with winning a competition you weren't even participating in, you were busy mastering the art of self-awareness. This journey is no longer about proving them wrong or showing them how well you are doing. It is about the deep, soul-level recognition of who you are. You are chosen not because your life was designed to be easy, but because you were built with the structural integrity to endure what would have shattered most people. You are still standing today not by some random accident of fate, but by a very specific and intentional design. The same eyes that once watched you with suspicion and judgment are now forced to watch you with something far more uncomfortable. A respect they will never have the courage to admit, and a fear of your light that they will never escape. Hold your ground, stay precise in your actions, and always remember that when someone shows you who they are behind the curtain, the most powerful move you can make is not confrontation, but total detachment. You were never meant to remain in spaces where your basic humanity had to be constantly explained or defended. Take a breath and realize that if this feels uncomfortably familiar, it isn't a coincidence. It is a moment of profound recognition. If you want this kind of truth to keep reaching those who are quietly waking up to their own power, take a second to support the work we do here. Like the video so the algorithm can find the people who are searching for the truth but don't know where to look yet. Subscribe so we can continue to deliver the kind of content that cuts through the fog of confusion and exposes the hidden dynamics of the world. If you are starting to realize exactly why certain people had to be removed from your life for you to grow, drop a 77 in the comments below to signal your alignment. Now, let's move into the specific ways they tried to handle you, because if you are truly a chosen one, these next points will feel like a play-by-play of your own life. The first truth we must address is that they became so obsessed with you that they completely forgot to understand themselves. They treated you like a manual or a guidebook, only to eventually realize that you were never a code meant to be cracked. The longer they spent studying your reactions and analyzing your pauses, the more obvious it became that they were actually lost inside the maze of their own minds. This is where their illusion of control first began to show its cracks. There are people in your past who spent an unhealthy amount of time watching you, not to grow with you or learn beside you, but to study you the way a thief studies a lock they intend to break. They logged every decision you made, replayed every conversation, and analyzed every move, convinced that if they watched long enough, they would find a weakness. In their minds, they believed that once they fully understood you, they would be able to manage you and keep you within their sphere of influence. But the irony that hits them the hardest is that they have spent more time studying you than they ever spent looking at their own reflections, yet they still learned nothing useful. Have you ever wondered why your smallest choices seem to attract such a heavy amount of commentary or silent judgment? It wasn't because you were doing anything wrong. It was because your presence didn't fit into the narrow mental framework they used to navigate the world. You didn't behave the way they expected a normal person to behave, and rather than questioning their own limited perspective, they chose to double down on analyzing you as the outlier. They acted like collectors of your mistakes, hoping that one day they would find a flaw large enough to use as leverage against you. They watched your habits and your quietest moments, convinced that somewhere in that observation was the key to your undoing. But the more they looked, the more they realized that chosen ones are not linear beings. You are layered, adaptive, and you evolve much faster than their assumptions can keep up with. Their efforts were ultimately pointless because they weren't even studying the real you. They were studying a projection of you that they created out of their own fears and insecurities. Every hour they spent tracking your moves only served to expose their own lack of personal direction and their deep-seated need for external focus. While they were busy trying to predict your next step, you were learning how to move through the world without needing their awareness or approval at all. They made the mistake of thinking that observation equals power, but observation without self-awareness is nothing more than obsession dressed up as intelligence. It is like someone staring at the surface of the ocean trying to calculate the waves while completely failing to understand the power of the tide beneath. They mistook proximity for insight, thinking that being close to you gave them access to your soul. In reality, they were only revealing their own limitations because a person who truly knows themselves has no need to obsess over the lives of others. You weren't hiding. You were simply operating from a level of depth they couldn't reach. Your strength never came from keeping secrets. It came from being in total alignment with your purpose. You were grounded enough that their scrutiny didn't rattle your foundation, which only added to their frustration. You might have asked why it felt like they never got you, despite how much they watched. The truth is that you were never meant to be decoded by people who only understand surface-level patterns. You move with intuition and internal clarity, while they move with checklists and outdated social assumptions. Every attempt they made to map out your mind only highlighted how shallow their own understanding of the human spirit really was. They assumed you were as predictable as they are, and that assumption was their greatest undoing. They thought that if they watched long enough, they would see a crack in your armor, but all they ever found was more depth. And to a person who survives on control, depth is the most terrifying thing in the world. This is where your quiet victory lies. You didn't have to fight them, and you didn't have to explain your complexity. Their failure happened entirely within themselves, as every one of their predictions missed the mark, and every strategy they tried fell flat. They were playing a game of chess, convinced you were just a piece on their board, never realizing that you weren't even playing the same game. Their obsession only confirmed that they were never in control of the situation, and they never will be. The second reason their plans failed is that every attack they launched missed because they were targeting an outdated version of you. They kept swinging at your past self, completely unaware that you had already outgrown the person they were trying to fight. You cannot defeat someone who no longer exists, and the version of you they hold in their minds is nothing more than a ghost. They clung to the memory of who you were when you were still healing, still unsure of yourself, or still learning how to set boundaries. They convinced themselves that if they just used the same old manipulations, you would react in the same old ways. But they were fighting an echo while you were standing in the full light of your present power. They spent countless hours replaying old moments and dragging up past mistakes, treating your history like a script they thought you would be forced to follow forever. Every jab and every calculated move was aimed at a person who used to hesitate or explain too much. Chosen ones, have you noticed how people who want to control you are always the ones most obsessed with your past? They keep bringing it up because the past version of you is the only one they feel equipped to handle. Your growth is a direct threat to them because it proves that their influence is no longer relevant. While they stayed stuck in the past, time moved you forward into a version of yourself that their old tools simply cannot reach. You shed the parts of your personality that were once accessible to their manipulation and replaced them with firm boundaries and a guarded energy. You learned how to pause and observe rather than reacting impulsively, and you did all of this without making a single announcement. They believed that knowing your history gave them a permanent roadmap to your heart, but they forgot that growth rewrites the rules of the game. Things that used to hurt you have now become valuable pieces of information, and the chaos that once overwhelmed you is now something you can see coming from a mile away. You didn't become hard, you became refined, learning how to stay present without staying exposed to their toxicity. This is a crucial moment of clarity for you. Your evolution happened quietly and consistently until one day, their attacks simply stopped making sense. While they were busy fighting the ghost of your past, you were living fully in the present, grounded and impossible to manipulate. If you ever wondered why their behavior started to seem almost desperate, it is because none of their old, reliable tactics were working anymore. They doubled down on the noise and the narratives, hoping something would finally break. But the only thing that broke was their illusion of being important to your journey. You have fortified your inner world in ways they never anticipated, and you now have the ability to sit with discomfort without letting it define who you are. Every failed attack they launch is just further proof that they don't see who you are today, and that is not a problem that you are responsible for fixing. This is where detachment becomes your most natural state of being. When you realize that people are literally arguing with a memory of you, you stop feeling the need to engage or correct them. You let them exhaust themselves fighting a shadow while you continue to move forward into your purpose. You didn't change overnight. You evolved through the fire, and they simply failed to keep up with the heat. You are beyond their reach because you are beyond their understanding, and once you see that clearly, cutting ties isn't a dramatic emotional reaction. It's just the only logical conclusion left. The third truth is that they try to crush you with pressure, not knowing that you are the type of person who converts that pressure into pure strength. They thought that by tightening the grip, increasing the criticism, the tension, and the disruptions, you would eventually crack under the strain. They assumed that your composure would eventually slip, and they would finally get the messy reaction they were so desperately waiting for. But they misunderstood your fundamental nature. They assumed pressure works the same on everyone because pressure is what breaks them. They never considered the possibility that some people are built like a forge. The more heat and pressure you apply, the more you are actually reshaping and strengthening the steel within. You didn't collapse, you adapted. Every insult and every betrayal became the raw material you used to build a better version of yourself. While they thought they were overwhelming you, You were actually sharpening your instincts and learning to see motives much sooner than before. You started to feel less of a need to defend yourself because you realized that their pressure was actually giving you the clarity you needed to move. This is the part they will never admit. The harder they pushed, the less access they actually had to your spirit. Their tactics became predictable and repetitive, while your response became one of calm, strategic precision. They showed their desperation for control, while you showed how little you actually needed it. They measured your capacity for pain by their own limits, and that was their fatal mistake. What would have shattered an average person only served to forge you into someone far more formidable and steady. Pressure stopped being a threat to you and started being a source of information about who was truly for you and who was against you. Once you learn how to metabolize stress and turn it into strategy, there is nothing left for them to threaten you with. You don't flinch or scramble when things get difficult. You analyze the situation and move with a deliberate intent. Their attempts to suffocate your growth only made it clearer that you are someone who doesn't need to raise your voice to assert total control over your life. Finally, we must talk about your silence. Your silence was never a sign of submission. It was a form of strategic control that they completely misread. They mistook your patience for permission to continue their behavior, and that miscalculation cost them everything they were trying to gain. They stood at a distance waiting for a reaction they could exploit, convinced that your restraint meant you were afraid or uncertain of yourself. In their world, patience is seen as weakness or hesitation, but in your world, it is a deliberate choice. You were observing and measuring the room while they were busy making noise and revealing their hands. Your silence wasn't empty. It was loaded with the weight of your growing discernment. You denied them the one thing they wanted most, access to your emotional energy. They thought their calm meant they were winning, but in reality, it meant they were being meticulously studied by someone who knows how to wait for the right moment. You understood that reacting emotionally only feeds those who thrive on chaos, so you chose to remain a mystery to them. By the time they realized that your patience was actually a boundary, it was already too late for them to change the outcome. You have learned that you don't need to react to prove your strength, and you don't need to explain yourself to remain the most powerful person in the room. You are moving forward now with a clarity that no amount of noise can ever disturb.